The sound of a baccarat crystal glass shattering against the marble floor of l'Orangerie was louder than a gunshot. The entire restaurant, filled with Manhattan's billionaires, politicians and socialites, froze instantly. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Conversations died in throats. All eyes turned to table 1, the throne of Victoria Vanderwall. She stood over the trembling new waitress, her lips curled in a sneer that had destroyed careers and marriages alike. She thought she had found another victim to crush for sport. But what Victoria didn't know was that the girl picking up the shards wasn't just a clumsy waitress. She was the one person holding the match that would burn Victoria's fake empire to the ground. And by the time dessert was served, the Queen of New York wouldn't be feared. She would be a laughing stock. In the high-stakes ecosystem of New York's fine dining, fear had a scent. At l'Orangerie, an establishment so exclusive that reservations were hereditary, that scent was a mix of expensive perfume, stale anxiety, and the terrifying click-clack of Victoria Vanderwall's Louboutin heels. It was 7:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, the time the staff referred to as the witching hour. Jean-Pierre, the maitre d', stood by the host stand, his knuckles white as he gripped the reservation book. He checked his watch. "She is 3 minutes late," he whispered to Charles, the head sommelier. "Perhaps we will be spared tonight?" Charles didn't answer. He just adjusted his tie, looking like a man preparing for a firing squad. Victoria Vanderwall was the wife of Arthur Vanderwall, a steel and shipping magnate whose net worth rivaled the GDP of small countries. But while Arthur was known for his quiet, if ruthless, business acumen, Victoria was known for her noise. She was a woman who treated service staff not like human beings, but like malfunctioning appliances that needed to be kicked. She had once thrown a plate of risotto al tartufo at a waiter because the truffles were sliced with the wrong attitude. The heavy oak doors swung open. The air in the restaurant seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria entered. She was beautiful in a terrifying, synthetic way. Blonde hair lacquered into a helmet of perfection, a face pulled tight by the best surgeons in Switzerland, and a diamond necklace that cost more than the building they were standing in. Trailing behind her, looking perpetually exhausted, was Arthur. He wore a tuxedo that fit perfectly, but his shoulders slumped as if he were carrying an invisible load of bricks. "Jean-Pierre," Victoria said, her voice like grinding glass. She didn't look at him. She looked past him, scanning the room to see who was watching her. "My table had better be ready. Last time there was a smudge on the water glass. I almost vomited." "Of course, Mrs. Vanderwall. Table 1 is pristine," Jean-Pierre said, bowing low. He led them to the prime table in the center of the room, the one with the best lighting and the maximum visibility. As Victoria sat, she made a show of inspecting the cutlery, holding a silver fork up to the light and squinting. "Acceptable," she muttered, dropping it onto the table with a clatter. "Where is that incompetent boy from last week? The one with the stutter?" "Michael is no longer with us, Mrs. Vanderwall," Jean-Pierre said smoothly. He decided to pursue other opportunities. In reality, Michael had quit 10 minutes after Victoria called him a waste of oxygen because the ice in her sparkling water was too cloudy. "Good," she sniffed. "I hope he's working at a gas station. It's all he's suited for. Now send over a waiter who actually has a brain, and bring the wine list, the real one, not the one you showed the tourists." Jean-Pierre nodded and retreated to the kitchen, where the staff was huddled like soldiers in a trench. "Who's taking table 1?" Jean-Pierre asked, his voice tight. The seasoned waiters all took a simultaneous step back. Nobody wanted to be the target. "I'll do it," a calm voice said from the back. Jean-Pierre turned. It was the new girl. Sarah. Sarah Bennett had only been working at l'Orangerie for 3 days. She was 26, with messy brown hair tied back in a severe bun and thick-rimmed glasses that constantly slid down her nose. She was quiet, efficient, and entirely unremarkable. To the rest of the staff, she was a ghost. She came in, did her work, and left without sharing a single detail about her life. Sarah, Jean-Pierre warned, his eyes full of pity. You don't understand. This woman eats people like you for breakfast. She will find a flaw that doesn't exist. She will try to make you cry. Sarah adjusted her apron. Her expression didn't change. It wasn't fear. It wasn't arrogance. It was a strange, cold neutrality. I can handle a difficult customer, Jean-Pierre, Sarah said. Just give me the wine list. She isn't a customer, Charles whispered, handing her the heavy leather-bound book. She's a predator. Sarah took the book. Predators only attack when they smell fear, she said softly. I don't bleed. She pushed through the swinging doors and walked out onto the floor. Sarah approached table 1 with a steady rhythm. She didn't rush, nor did she drag her feet. She placed the wine list down gently to the right of Arthur, as was proper protocol. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Vanderwall, Sarah said. Her voice was clear, lacking the tremulous subservience Victoria was used to. My name is Sarah. I'll be taking care of you this evening. Victoria didn't look up from her phone. She was scrolling through Instagram, likely checking the likes on her latest selfie. Water. Sparkling. Lemon. No seeds. If I see a seed, you're eating it. Arthur gave Sarah an apologetic glance, a fleeting look of tired camaraderie that Sarah caught instantly. I'll have a scotch. Neat. The Macallan 25, if you have it. Certainly, sir, Sarah said. She turned to Victoria. And for you, madam, would you like to see the wine list? Victoria finally looked up. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned Sarah's uniform. She looked for a stain, a loose thread, a hair out of place. Finding none, she scoffed. New, aren't you? Victoria asked. Yes, madam. You look plain, Victoria said, loud enough for the neighbouring table, a senator and his mistress, to hear. I suppose standards are slipping. I used to come here and be served by models. Now they hire librarians. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't blush. She simply clasped her hands behind her back. I apologize if my appearance displeases you, Mrs. Vanderwall. However, I assure you my service is impeccable. Victoria laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Impeccable? We'll see. Bring me a bottle of the Chateau Margaux 2009 and decant it. Don't shake it like a cocktail shaker, you hear me? An excellent choice, Sarah said. The 2009 is drinking beautifully right now. I will return shortly. Back in the kitchen, Charles was already pulling the bottle. She ordered the 09 Margaux. Of course she did. It's the most expensive Bordeaux on the list. She doesn't know wine. She knows price tags. She called me a librarian, Sarah said, picking up the silver tray with the lemon slices. She was meticulously checking each slice for seeds with a pair of tweezers. That's a compliment coming from her, Charles muttered. Usually she starts with idiot and works her way down to barnyard animals. Sarah returned to the table. She presented the bottle to Arthur first, as per tradition. But Victoria snapped her fingers. Show it to me, she commanded. He doesn't care. He'd drink gasoline if it cost $1,000. Sarah turned the label toward Victoria. Victoria glanced at it and waved her hand dismissively. Open it, and don't spill a drop. The dining room was quiet. People were watching. They always watched Victoria's table, waiting for the inevitable explosion. It was the best theatre in New York. Sarah cut the foil with surgical precision. She drove the corkscrew in, pulled the cork smoothly, and wiped the lip of the bottle. She poured a small taste into Victoria's glass. Victoria picked up the glass. She didn't swirl it. She didn't smell it. She just took a large gulp, swishing it around in her mouth like mouthwash before swallowing. She made a face. Disgusting! Victoria slammed the glass down. Wine sloshed over the rim onto the white tablecloth. It's corked. Take it away. The room gasped. A bottle of Chateau Margaux, 2009, cost upwards of $2,000 at a restaurant markup. To send it back was a declaration of war. Arthur sighed, rubbing his temples. Victoria, please, it's fine. Shut up, Arthur, she hissed. Then she turned her predator eyes on Sarah. Are you deaf? I said it's corked. It tastes like wet cardboard and vinegar. Bring me another one, a fresh one. Jean-Pierre, watching from the sidelines, felt his heart stop. If they opened another bottle, and she rejected that one too, the restaurant would be out thousands of dollars. But one did not say no to Victoria Vanderwall. Sarah stood perfectly still. She looked at the bottle, then at the glass, and finally at Victoria. Mrs. Vanderwall, Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming serious and authoritative. I personally checked the cork. It is in perfect condition. The wine has been stored in a temperature-controlled cellar at 55 degrees. I assure you, the wine is not corked. Victoria's eyes widened. No waiter had ever contradicted her. Are you calling me a liar? Victoria's voice rose to a shriek. I know wine. My family owns vineyards in Napa. I know what corked wine tastes like, and this is swill. Now take it away before I have you fired. I cannot take it away, madam, Sarah said calmly, because there is nothing wrong with it. Perhaps your palate is compromised tonight. Have you had any mints recently? Or perhaps a toothpaste with a high fluoride content? The silence in the restaurant was absolute. The senator at the next table stopped chewing his steak. Victoria stood up. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. She grabbed the bottle of wine by the neck. You insolent little servant, Victoria spat. You think you're smarter than me? You're a nobody, a tray carrier. I could buy your entire life with the change in my purse. Victoria, sit down, Arthur said, his voice hardening for the first time. No, she screamed. She looked at Sarah with pure hatred. I want the manager, now, and I want this girl thrown out on the street. Jean-Pierre rushed over, wringing his hands. Mrs. Vanderwall, please, I apologize. Sarah is new. She doesn't know. I don't want apologies, Victoria yelled. I want her gone. Look at her. She's standing there looking at me like I'm the crazy one. Sarah hadn't moved. She hadn't backed down. She looked at Jean-Pierre. The wine is not corked, Jean-Pierre. If you open another bottle, it will be a waste of inventory. You listen to me. Victoria leaned over the table, getting right in Sarah's face. You are going to take this bottle. You are going to pour it down the sink. And then you are going to get on your knees and apologize for insulting me. Or I will make sure you never work in this city again. Sarah looked into Victoria's eyes. And then, for the first time, she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a smile that said, checkmate. I won't be doing that, Mrs. Vanderwall, Sarah said, because the only thing fake at this table isn't the wine. Victoria blinked. What did you say? I said, Sarah's voice projected clearly through the silent room, that you wouldn't know a corked wine if it was labeled in neon. And frankly, considering you're wearing a knockoff Chanel suit from the 2018 outlet collection, I'm surprised you're lecturing anyone on quality. The silence following Sarah's declaration was heavy, the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. Victoria Vanderwall stood frozen, her hand still gripping the neck of the expensive wine bottle, her mouth slightly open. The accusation hung in the air. Knockoff. For a woman whose entire identity was constructed on the foundation of exclusivity and wealth, being accused of wearing counterfeit couture was worse than being accused of murder. "Excuse me?" Victoria whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and genuine shock. "What did you say to me?" Sarah didn't retreat. She took a small, deliberate step closer to the table, her hands still clasped politely behind her back. She looked like a schoolteacher scolding a petulant child. "I said," Sarah repeated, her voice calm and projecting to the back of the room, "that your suit is a fake. A very good one, I'll admit. It likely came from the Guangzhou replicator markets, specifically the Grade A factories. But it is not Chanel." Victoria let out a screech of laughter that sounded bordering on hysterical. She turned to the room, spreading her arms. "Did you hear that? This waitress thinks she knows fashion. I paid $5,000 for this jacket." She turned back to Sarah, her eyes manic. "You jealous little rat. This is authentic tweed. Look at the buttons. Look at the cut." "The buttons are the giveaway," Sarah said, her tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. Coco Chanel was obsessed with buttonholes. In an authentic jacket from the 2018 collection, the buttonholes are hand-stitched with silk thread. Yours are machine-stitched. You can tell by the slight puckering at the edges. Sarah raised a hand and pointed a slender finger at Victoria's sleeve. Furthermore, the lining. Authentic Chanel jackets have a weighted chain sewn into the hem of the silk lining to ensure it hangs perfectly flat. If you were to stand up straight, Mrs. Vanderwall, we would see your jacket flaring slightly at the hips. There is no chain. It's cheap polyester blend lining trying to pass as silk. The senator at the next table leaned forward, squinting at Victoria's jacket. His mistress whispered, "Oh my God, she's right. Look at the hem. It's bunching up." Victoria's face went from red to a ghostly pale. She clutched the lapels of her jacket, trying to hide the stitching. "Arthur," she shrieked, turning to her husband, "do something. She is humiliating me. Tell them how much you paid for this." Arthur Vanderwall looked at his wife. He looked at the jacket. For the first time in years, the fog in his eyes seemed to clear. He took a sip of his scotch. "I didn't pay for that jacket, Victoria," Arthur said quietly. "You told me you bought it with your own investment money. From your consulting business." The air in the room shifted. Everyone in New York high society knew Victoria claimed to run a boutique investment firm, though no one had ever actually seen an office or a client. I, Victoria stammered. "Of course I did. And I bought it at the flagship store on 57th Street. "No, you didn't," Sarah interjected smoothly. "Because I worked at the flagship store on 57th Street in 2018. I was the inventory manager. That specific collection was limited release. We only received 3 in that color. One went to Anna Wintour, one went to an actress who is currently filming in London, and the third is in a museum archive. You, Mrs. Vanderwall, were never on the client list." A gasp rippled through the dining room. This wasn't just a waitress noticing a flaw. This was an insider dropping a nuclear bomb. Victoria looked around wildly. She saw the smirks on the faces of the other diners. She saw the waiters covering their mouths to hide their smiles. Her power, usually so absolute in this room, was evaporating like mist. "You're lying," Victoria hissed, tears of rage pricking her eyes. "You're just a lying, pathetic servant. I'm going to have you arrested for slander. I'm going to sue this restaurant into the ground." She grabbed her clutch, a crocodile skin Hermes Birkin bag, and slammed it onto the table. "And what about this? Is this fake too? My $50,000 bag. Sarah glanced at the bag. She didn't even need to inspect it closely. The hardware, Sarah said simply. Hermes uses palladium or gold. That clasp has a slight brassy tint under the halogen lights. And the smell, genuine crocodile leather smells earthy, musky. That smells like chemical sealant. Shall I check the serial number inside? It should be embossed, not printed. Victoria snatched the bag back, clutching it to her chest like a shield. She was hyperventilating now. The Queen of New York was being stripped naked in front of her subjects, layer by fake layer. "Get the manager!" Victoria screamed, her voice cracking. "Get him now!" Jean-Pierre, who had been watching the scene with a mixture of horror and awe, finally snapped out of his trance. He scurried toward the back office. This was beyond his pay grade. This required the owner. Arthur Vanderwall set his glass down. He looked at Sarah with a strange expression, not anger, but curiosity. "Who are you?" he asked softly. "Just a waitress, Mr. Vanderwall," Sarah replied, refilling his water glass with perfect, steady hands. "Would you like some more bread while we wait for the manager? The sourdough is fresh." The double doors to the kitchen burst open, and Gustavo Moretti stormed out. Gustavo was the owner of l'Orangerie, a man who had built his reputation on catering to the whims of the ultra-rich. He was short, round, and currently sweating profusely. He had been in his office counting the night's receipts when Jean-Pierre told him that Table 1 was in revolt. Gustavo feared two things in life: the health inspector and Victoria Vanderwall. Victoria spent nearly $250,000 a year at his restaurant. She was his whale. He rushed to the table, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Mrs. Vanderwall! Arthur!" Gustavo gasped, ignoring Sarah completely. "What is happening? I heard there was an issue with the wine. Please, allow me to bring you a bottle of the 82 Petrus on the house. My deepest apologies." Victoria stood up, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. "Fire her." "Excuse me?" Gustavo blinked. "Fire her, now." Victoria enunciated every word with venom. "She insulted me. She called me a liar. She claimed my clothes are fake. She humiliated me in front of the entire restaurant. I want her fired, and I want her banned from the premises. If you don't do it, Gustavo, I will ruin you. I will tell everyone that your kitchen is infested with rats. I will write reviews that will burn this place down." Gustavo turned to Sarah. His face hardened. He didn't care about the truth. He cared about the bottom line. Waitresses were replaceable. Whales like Victoria were not. "Sarah," Gustavo barked. "Get your things. You're done. Leave immediately." Sarah didn't move. She didn't look at Gustavo. She was looking at a man sitting 3 tables away, a quiet man with silver hair who had been watching the entire exchange over the top of his reading glasses. "Did you hear me?" Gustavo shouted, stepping closer to her. "I said, get out. You are fired." "You can't fire me, Gustavo," Sarah said calmly. "I am the owner. I can do whatever I want." "You can," Sarah acknowledged. "But if you fire me for refusing to serve perfectly good wine to a bully, you'll have a much bigger problem than a bad Yelp review." "Are you threatening me?" Gustavo laughed incredulously. "You're a nobody. You've been here 3 days. And in those 3 days," Sarah said, turning to face him, "I've noticed some interesting things about your bookkeeping, Gustavo." Gustavo froze. His face went from red to grey. "I noticed that you buy your truffles from a supplier in New Jersey who deals in, let's say, grey market goods," Sarah continued, her voice dropping so only the table and Gustavo could hear. "And I noticed that while you charge customers for wild Scottish salmon, the boxes in the freezer are clearly marked Farmed Atlantic. That is fraud, Gustavo. You shut up," Gustavo whispered, looking around frantically. "And," Sarah went on, relentless. "I think Mr. Vanderwall here would be very interested to know that while you charge him $3,000 for a bottle of vintage wine, the inventory logs show that you've been refilling old bottles with cheaper vintages for his table specifically, because you assumed he wouldn't notice." Arthur Vanderwall stood up slowly. He was a tall man, and when he stood to his full height, he cast a long shadow over the table. The tired slump was gone. In its place was the cold, hard steel of a tycoon who had just realized he was being robbed. "Is that true, Gustavo?" Arthur asked. His voice was very quiet, which made it terrifying. "No, Mr. Vanderwall, she is lying." "She is crazy," Gustavo stammered, wringing his hands. "I can show you the bottles in the cellar right now," Sarah offered. "The corks on the vintage bottles have been pierced twice, once for the original opening and once for the refill. A Corvin system leaves a very distinct mark. Gustavo thinks he's clever, but he's sloppy." Victoria, seeing the tide turn, tried to regain control. "Arthur, stop listening to the help. Who cares about the wine? She insulted me. She insulted your wife." Arthur ignored Victoria. He stared at Gustavo. "I spend $200,000 a year here, Gustavo. Are you telling me I've been drinking house wine with a fancy label?" "Mr. Vanderwall, please, let's discuss this in my office," Gustavo pleaded. "We will discuss nothing," Arthur said. He looked at Sarah. "Show me." "No." Victoria grabbed Arthur's arm, digging her nails into his suit. "You are not going anywhere with her. I forbid it. If you walk away from this table, Arthur, I swear to God." "You swear what, Victoria?" Arthur pulled his arm away violently. "You'll leave me? You'll take half my money?" He looked at her with pure disgust. "You're wearing a fake suit, carrying a fake bag, spending my money on God knows what while pretending to be an investor. And now I find out the restaurant you insisted we come to, the only one you like, is ripping me off. I'm starting to wonder, Victoria, is there anything in my life that isn't a lie?" Victoria gasped. She had used Arthur as a doormat for 10 years. She had never expected the doormat to stand up. I am your wife," she wailed, playing the victim card. "We'll see about that," Arthur muttered. He nodded to Sarah. "Lead the way to the cellar." "Wait," a voice called out from the nearby table. It was the silver-haired man Sarah had been looking at earlier. He stood up and wiped his mouth with a napkin. He walked over to table 1. Gustavo looked like he was about to faint. "Mr. Hamilton, I hope your meal was satisfactory." Mr. Hamilton ignored Gustavo. He looked at Sarah. "I thought I recognized you," Mr. Hamilton said, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's been a few years, hasn't it? Since the incident in Milan." Sarah nodded politely. "Good evening, Mr. Hamilton. It has been 3 years." Victoria looked between them, confused. "Who is this? Who cares?" "I care," Mr. Hamilton said. He turned to Victoria. "I am Robert Hamilton. I own the Hamilton Group." The Hamilton Group was a luxury conglomerate that owned half the fashion brands in Europe, including the one Victoria claimed to be wearing. "And this young woman," Robert Hamilton gestured to Sarah, "is not just a waitress. Before she disappeared from the scene, Sarah Bennett was the youngest and most feared forensic accountant in the fashion industry. She was the one who exposed the Pierre Cardin embezzlement scandal. She has an eye for detail that makes microscopes look blurry." He looked at Victoria's jacket. "And if she says your jacket is a fake, Mrs. Vanderwall, then I would bet my entire company that it is a fake." The room erupted into whispers. Sarah wasn't a nobody. She was a legend in hiding. Victoria Vanderwall looked at Sarah, then at Arthur, then at the laughing faces of the crowd. The walls were closing in, but Victoria was a cornered animal, and she had one last card to play, a card she had been saving for an emergency. She reached into her purse, the fake Hermes, and pulled out her phone. "You think you've won?" Victoria snarled, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you can humiliate me?" "I have friends, Arthur. Powerful friends. And I have something on you, remember? The Cayman accounts?" Arthur froze. Victoria smiled, a cruel, twisted smile. "That's right. If I go down, Arthur, I take you with me. So you are going to sit down, you are going to fire this girl, and you are going to buy me that bottle of wine. Or I make a phone call to the IRS right now." The threat hung in the air like toxic smoke. The Cayman accounts. For a man like Arthur Vanderwall, whose empire was built on steel and shipping, an IRS investigation wasn't just a headache, it was a death sentence. Even if he was innocent, the mere whisper of tax evasion would tank his stock prices, spook his board of directors, and ruin the legacy his grandfather had built. Victoria knew this. She stood there, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the dial button, a triumphant smirk plastered on her surgically enhanced face. She had played her ace. Arthur slumped back into his chair, the fight draining out of him. He looked old, defeated. "You wouldn't," Arthur whispered. "Try me," Victoria sneered. "Fire the girl, buy the wine, and apologize to me. Or I pressed send, and by tomorrow morning, the feds will be raiding your office." Gustavo, sensing a victory, puffed his chest out. "You heard, Mrs. Vanderwall. Arthur, be reasonable. This girl is trouble. Let me escort her out, and we can forget this ever happened." The dining room was silent. All eyes were on Arthur, waiting for him to fold. It was the natural order of things. The rich bully wins, the husband capitulates, and the help gets fired. But Sarah Bennett didn't move toward the door. Instead, she took a step closer to Victoria. "Go ahead," Sarah said. Victoria blinked. "What?" "Make the call," Sarah challenged, her voice cool and steady. "Call the IRS. In fact, put it on speaker. I'd love to hear what you tell them." "Are you insane?" Arthur hissed, looking up at Sarah with panic in his eyes. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? She has the account numbers. She has the ledgers." "She has nothing, Mr. Vanderwall," Sarah said, never taking her eyes off Victoria. Or rather, she has exactly what she created. Victoria's thumb froze. "Shut up! You don't know anything about our finances." "I don't know your finances." Sarah tilted her head. "Let's test that theory. You're referring to the account with the Cayman National Bank, ending in 8842, the one listed under a holding company called Vanderwall Logistics, LLC. Victoria's jaw dropped. The phone nearly slipped from her hand. How do you know that?" "I know it," Sarah continued, pacing slowly around the table like a shark circling a swimmer. "Because that account doesn't belong to Arthur. It belongs to you." A murmur went through the crowd. Robert Hamilton, standing nearby, crossed his arms and grinned. He knew exactly where this was going. "That's a lie!" Victoria shrieked. "It's Arthur's money. He signed the papers." "Did he?" Sarah stopped right next to Arthur. "Mr. Vanderwall, 3 years ago, did you sign a document authorizing the transfer of $2 million to an offshore entity for consulting fees?" Arthur frowned, thinking hard. I don't think so. I sign a lot of things. Victoria brings me papers for the house, for her business. She brought you a power of attorney document buried in a stack of real estate forms, Sarah explained. "I've seen the digital trail. You see, Mrs. Vanderwall, when you try to hide money, you shouldn't use a localized IP address from your own penthouse Wi-Fi." Sarah turned back to the room, addressing the audience as much as Victoria. "I didn't just stumble into l'Orangerie by accident," Sarah revealed. I've been tracking a sophisticated embezzlement ring operating out of New York for the last 6 months. My client prefers to remain anonymous, but they noticed irregularities in the luxury goods market. Fake invoices, money moving to shell companies. All roads led to a boutique investment firm run by a socialite who buys fake Chanel and drinks expensive wine. She pointed at Victoria. You haven't been investing Arthur's money, Victoria. You've been stealing it. You created the Cayman account to siphon funds from his personal estate. You threaten him with it, claiming it's illegal tax evasion on his part, but in reality, it's a theft account on yours. If you call the IRS right now, Arthur won't go to jail. You will. Victoria's face was a mask of sheer terror. The color had drained so completely from her skin that her heavy makeup looked like a clown's paint. You're bluffing, Victoria whispered, but her voice lacked any power. You're just a waitress. I am a forensic accountant who is currently waitressing undercover to get access to Gustavo's physical receipts, Sarah corrected. And I have to say, your husband is clean. You, however, you're facing 15 to 20 years for wire fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. Arthur stood up. He looked at his wife, really looked at her. For the first time in a decade, he saw the fear. He saw the guilt. Is it true? Arthur asked. His voice was heavy with betrayal. The investment losses last year, the $3 million you said we lost in the market. Was that you? Victoria stepped back, bumping into the table. Arthur, baby, listen to me. I did it for us. I wanted to surprise you. She's lying. She's trying to break us apart. Show me the phone, Arthur demanded, holding out his hand. No, Victoria clutched it tight. Give me the damn phone, Victoria, Arthur roared, a sound so loud that the crystal glasses on the table rattled. Trembling, Victoria handed him the phone. It wasn't dialed to the IRS. It was open to a banking app. The balance showed 0. Where is it? Arthur asked, his voice shaking. Where is the money? I spent it, Victoria sobbed. Keeping up appearances is expensive, Arthur. You don't understand the pressure. The parties, the donations, the clothes. I had to fit in. You spent $3 million on fake clothes and fake friends. Arthur looked disgusted. He threw the phone onto the table. We are done. If Victoria thought the humiliation couldn't get worse, she was wrong. The dining room of l'Orangerie had transformed from a place of fine dining into a courtroom, and the verdict was guilty. But Sarah wasn't finished. She turned her attention to Gustavo. The restaurant owner was trying to inch his way toward the kitchen door, hoping to slip out the back exit before the debris settled. Going somewhere, Gustavo? Sarah asked. Gustavo froze. He turned around, offering a weak, sweaty smile. I have to check on the soufflés. Very delicate. Requires immediate attention. Sit down, Robert Hamilton ordered. The authority in the billionaire's voice was undeniable. Gustavo collapsed into the nearest chair. Sarah walked over to the service station and picked up the bottle of Chateau Margaux that Victoria had rejected earlier. Mr. Vanderwall, Sarah said, while your wife was stealing from your bank account, Gustavo here was stealing from your palate and your wallet. She held the bottle up to the light. Gustavo runs a very clever scam. He buys empty bottles of rare vintages from collectors, bottles that have been drunk but are physically intact. He then fills them with decent but significantly cheaper wine. A $20 Bordeaux, perhaps. He recorks them using a high-end recorking machine he keeps in his office. Sarah pulled a small UV flashlight from her apron pocket. It was a tool of her trade, not a waitress's accessory. She shone it on the label of the bottle. Real Chateau Margaux labels from 2009 react to UV light with a specific watermark pattern to prevent counterfeiting, Sarah explained. This label, It doesn't glow. It's a high-quality photocopy glued onto an old bottle. He's not just refilling real bottles. When he runs out of those, he's manufacturing fakes entirely. Arthur walked over to Gustavo. The steel tycoon looked ready to bend an iron bar with his bare hands. I have spent. How much here, Gustavo? Over the years? I can refund you, Gustavo squeaked. Store credit. Free desserts for life. I don't want your desserts, Arthur spat. I want to know how many people you've ripped off. Everyone, Sarah answered for him. The senator's truffle risotto? Using truffle oil instead of real shavings. The Wagyu beef? Standard prime rib. This entire restaurant is a facade, just like Victoria's lifestyle. At that moment, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open again. But this time, it wasn't a socialite. It was 4 officers from the NYPD, followed by 2 agents in suits who looked distinctly like federal investigators. The room fell deadly silent. One of the agents, a stern woman with a sharp bob, scanned the room. Her eyes landed on Sarah. Agent Miller, Sarah said, nodding. You made good time. You gave us the signal, Bennett, Agent Miller replied. She walked straight to table 1. Victoria Vanderwall. Victoria was hyperventilating, clutching the tablecloth. I want my lawyer. I am a Vanderwall. Not for much longer, I suspect, Agent Miller said dryly. You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. We have the warrant. One of the officers stepped forward and pulled Victoria's hands behind her back. The click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound the patrons of l'Orangerie had ever heard. Arthur, Victoria screamed as they hauled her up. Arthur, tell them who I am. Don't let them take me. Arthur turned his back on her. He picked up his glass of scotch, the only honest thing on the table, and took a sip. I don't know who you are, he said quietly. I never did. As they dragged Victoria away, kicking and screaming about her rights and her Chanel suit, the second agent moved toward Gustavo. Gustavo Moretti, the agent said. We have a warrant for your arrest as well. Consumer fraud, grand larceny, and health code violations regarding the sourcing of unregulated meat products. Gustavo didn't scream. He simply wept, his head in his hands, as the officers hoisted him up. Within 5 minutes, the 2 tyrants of l'Orangerie were gone. The restaurant was left with a stunned staff, a room full of bewildered millionaires, and Sarah Bennett standing in the center of it all, adjusting her glasses. Jean-Pierre, the maître d'aider, looked at Sarah. He looked at the empty spot where Gustavo used to stand. He looked at the kitchen staff peeking out. So, Jean-Pierre said, his voice trembling slightly. Does this mean you are not actually a waitress? Sarah smiled. She took off her apron and folded it neatly on the table. I made a pretty good waitress, didn't I, Jean-Pierre? I even remembered the senator's allergy to shellfish. Robert Hamilton walked over and placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. You were excellent, Sarah. As always. The board is going to be very pleased with your report on the luxury fraud ring. You've saved the industry millions tonight. Arthur Vanderwall was still standing by the table, looking at the wreckage of his evening. He looked lost. Sarah walked over to him. She didn't look at him with pity, but with respect. Mr. Vanderwall, she said. Arthur looked up. You ruined my life tonight, he said, but there was no anger in it. And you probably saved the rest of it. The truth hurts, Sarah said, but it costs a lot less than lies in the long run. Arthur let out a short, dry laugh. I suppose I need a new accountant and a divorce lawyer. You wouldn't happen to know any good ones? I know the best in the city, Sarah said. She pulled a business card from her pocket, her real business card, and handed it to him. Call this number tomorrow. They'll clean up the mess Victoria made of your accounts. You'll get most of it back. Arthur took the card. "Thank you, Sarah." He looked around the restaurant. "I suppose dinner is cancelled?" "Not necessarily," Sarah said. She turned to the kitchen staff, who were watching with wide eyes. "Charles, there is a case of real 1995 Brunello in the back of the cellar, hidden behind the cleaning supplies. Gustavo was saving it for himself. I suggest you open it for the house." Charles grinned. "Right away, Sarah." "And the sous chef," Sarah called out. "You make an excellent beef Wellington that Gustavo never lets you serve because it's too expensive to make. Tonight, make it for everyone." The kitchen staff cheered. The tension in the room broke. The diners, realizing they had just witnessed the takedown of the century and were getting free top-tier wine, started to applaud. It started with Robert Hamilton. Then the senator joined in, and soon the entire restaurant was giving Sarah Bennett a standing ovation. She didn't bow. She simply nodded, picked up her bag, and walked toward the door. Her job was done. The fake queen was dethroned, the fraudulent king was arrested, and the truth had been served. 6 months had passed since the night the crystal glass shattered against the marble floor of l'Orangerie, a sound that had echoed through the social stratospheres of Manhattan like a gunshot. The fallout had been swift, brutal, and public. But while the tabloids had moved on to the next scandal, the corner of 64th and Madison had undergone a quiet, miraculous transformation. The gilded, oppressive lettering of l'Orangerie was gone. The heavy velvet curtains that used to block out the world and hide the sins within had been pulled down. In their place stood a clean, understated sign in brushed copper. Veritas. Truth. It was 8 p.m. on a crisp Friday evening in November. In the old days, under Gustavo's tyranny, this was the hour of peak anxiety. It was the time when waiters would hyperventilate in the walk-in freezer, and Jean-Pierre would sweat through his starch-stiffened collar. But tonight, the air inside the restaurant didn't smell of fear and stale perfume. It smelled of roasted garlic, fresh rosemary, and something even rarer in this zip code: genuine laughter. Arthur Vanderwall sat at table 1. For a decade, this table had been his wife's stage, a platform from which she performed her cruel plays. Now, it was just a table. Arthur looked different. The heavy grey pallor that had clung to his skin, the billionaire's fatigue, had lifted. He was no longer wearing the suffocating 3-piece armor of his business suits. He wore a soft cashmere blazer, unbuttoned, with no tie. Across from him sat a young woman with bright eyes and messy hair, his daughter, Chloe. "I still can't believe you come here, Dad," Chloe said, tearing a piece of crusty, warm sourdough bread. "I thought you hated this place. You used to come home from dinner looking like you'd gone 15 rounds in a boxing ring." Arthur smiled, swirling the red wine in his glass. "I didn't hate the place, Chloe. I hated who I was when I was here. I hated the performance. But the bones of this place, they were always good. They just needed an exorcism." He looked up as a shadow fell over the table. It wasn't a looming threat, but a welcoming presence. "More wine for the table, Mr. Vanderwall?" It was Jean-Pierre, but the man standing there bore little resemblance to the terrified maître d'hôtel of the past. His posture was upright, his shoulders back. He wasn't wringing his hands. He was holding a bottle of Brunello di Montalcino with the confidence of a man who actually owned the floor he stood on. "Jean-Pierre," Arthur said warmly, "please sit for a moment. How are the numbers looking for the quarter?" Jean-Pierre beamed. "Better than Gustavo ever achieved, Arthur. And we haven't had to lie about a single truffle. Our food costs are up because we are buying real ingredients, but the waste is down because the staff actually cares. Nobody is stealing steaks out the back door anymore because they feel respected." "That's what I like to hear," Arthur said. "You run a tight ship, partner." Partner. That was the word that had changed everything. After the arrests, when the creditors came to scrap the restaurant, Arthur had bought the building outright. But he hadn't hired a new celebrity chef or a fancy management group. He had handed the keys to Jean-Pierre and Charles, offering them a 51% equity stake if they could turn the place around. He had turned the servants into owners. "Oh," Jean-Pierre lowered his voice slightly, a conspiratorial twinkle in his eye. "I almost forgot. There is someone at the bar asking for you. She said she didn't want a table. She just wanted to see if the ghosts were gone." Arthur's heart skipped a beat. He wiped his mouth with his napkin and stood up. "Excuse me, Chloe. I'll be right back." Arthur walked through the dining room. He passed the open kitchen, where he saw the staff moving in a synchronized, happy rhythm. No screaming, no throwing plates, just the hum of professionals doing what they loved. At the far end of the mahogany bar, nursing a simple club soda with lime, sat Sarah Bennett. She looked exactly as she had that night, unassuming, blending into the background, wearing a navy blazer and her signature thick-rimmed glasses. To the untrained eye, she was just a woman waiting for a friend. To Arthur, she was the soldier who had walked onto a battlefield, armed only with a wine opener, and saved his life. "Sarah," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. She turned on her stool, adjusting her glasses. A small, rare smile touched her lips. "Hello, Arthur. The place looks different. Lighter." "It feels lighter," Arthur admitted, taking the stool next to her. "I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again. My lawyers said you're a ghost. Even the check I sent you for the consulting fee took 3 weeks to clear because it went through 6 different holding companies." "Occupational hazard," Sarah shrugged. "I can't exactly have a public LinkedIn profile. Enemies tend to hold grudges." "Speaking of enemies," Arthur said, his expression hardening slightly. "I assume you heard about the sentencing hearing today." "I read the transcript," Sarah nodded. 12 years. Danbury Federal. It seems Victoria finally got that exclusive gated community she always wanted, just not the one she expected. "She tried to blame you, you know," Arthur said, staring into his drink. "In her statement, she called you a corporate spy who entrapped her. She couldn't understand that you didn't force her to steal. You just turned on the lights." "Narcissists never blame themselves, Arthur. They rewrite history to make themselves the victim," Sarah said calmly. "And Gustavo?" "Deported back to Italy yesterday," Arthur replied. "Although I hear the Italian authorities were waiting for him at the airport. Apparently, he has some unpaid debts regarding an olive oil scheme in Tuscany from the 90s. He won't be cooking any time soon." Arthur turned on the stool to face her fully. "Sarah, you saved me. And I'm not talking about the money. The lawyers got back about 60% of the liquid assets she stole, which is fine. But you stopped me from spending the rest of my life walking on eggshells. I'm reconnected with my daughter. I'm actually sleeping at night. How do I repay that?" Sarah took a sip of her soda. "You already did, Arthur. Look around." She gestured to the dining room. "I saw Charles pouring wine earlier. He was smiling. I saw the busboy joking with the chef. You broke the cycle of abuse. You didn't become bitter. You became better. That's the payment." "You're a strange woman, Sarah Bennett," Arthur laughed softly. "You walk into fires, put them out, and then refuse to take credit." "I don't put out fires, Arthur. I just find the arsonists," she corrected. She checked her watch, a utilitarian digital piece, not a Rolex. "I have to go. My flight leaves in 2 hours." "Where to next?" "London," Sarah said, sliding off the stool. There's a charity foundation run by a viscount that seems to be spending more on private jets than on orphans. Someone needs to audit the books." "They won't know what hit them," Arthur said. As she turned to leave, Arthur called out, one burning question still lingering in his mind after 6 months. "Sarah, wait." She paused, her hand on the brass railing of the exit. "That night," Arthur asked, walking closer to her, "the bottle of Chateau Margaux, the one that started it all. You told Victoria it wasn't corked. You swore on your reputation it was perfect." Arthur lowered his voice. "But Gustavo was refilling bottles with vinegar and cheap swill. So, was it corked, or was it just garbage?" Sarah looked at him, and the glint in her eyes was sharp enough to cut diamond. "Arthur," she said softly, "Gustavo was a fraud, yes. But that specific bottle? That was the one bottle in the entire cellar that was actually real. It was a perfect, pristine 2009 Margaux. I checked the provenance myself before service began." Arthur looked confused. "But Victoria said it tasted like cardboard. She almost threw up." "Exactly," Sarah smiled, and it was a look of pure, satisfied justice. "That's the thing about people like Victoria. Their souls are so rotten, so steeped in bitterness and artificiality, that they can no longer taste anything pure." She tasted her own reflection in that glass, Arthur. The wine was perfect. She was the one who was corked. Arthur stood stunned for a moment, absorbing the profound insult wrapped in elegance. By the time he chuckled, shaking his head in amazement, the door had already swung shut. Sarah Bennett was gone, disappearing into the chaotic current of New York City traffic. She was a ghost in the machine, a silent guardian of the ledger, heading toward the next lie waiting to be exposed. Arthur walked back to table 1, sat down across from his daughter, and raised his glass. "To the truth," he said. "To the truth," Chloe answered, clinking her glass against his. And for the first time in 20 years, the crystal rang out with a clear, pure note that sang through the room, unbroken. And that is the story of how one plain waitress took down the most feared woman in New York. It's a powerful reminder that true class isn't about what you wear, how much you shout, or the price tag on your wine bottle. True class is how you treat people when you think no one is watching. Victoria Vanderwall thought her money made her untouchable, but she learned the hard way that when you build a life on lies, all it takes is one person with the courage to pull the loose thread, and the whole thing unravels. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you have stayed quiet to keep your job, or would you have stood up for the truth? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please crush that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on the next drama. We have a wild story coming up next week about a CEO who disguised himself as a janitor, and you won't want to miss the twist. Thanks for watching.